Guys, welcome to another Xero tutorial. My name's Samuel Burmeister. I'm the owner here at Tall Books. Today we're going to cover a popular topic that's been demanded quite a bit, and that is tax codes in Xero. So I'll speak about your GST code options for each transaction and give you a simple breakdown to hopefully help you make better decisions with your coding and therefore make BAS time a lot easier. As a bit of a disclaimer, I am a registered BAS agent, so legally I'm allowed to talk about GST. However, this advice will be general as every business is different. So if you need individual information, please look at the ATO website, look at the TPB website, or contact me directly for an appointment. So let's jump in. I'm in the demo file at the moment. I'm going to show you an example of typical tax codes that you have to choose from for both deposits and withdrawals. So firstly, income. If you're a GST registered business, all your income within Australia should have GST on it, either included or you need to add it to that amount. So therefore, the tax rate that you'd be choosing would be your GST on income. Now, that's the straightforward option. The only time that you change that is if the sale or income is not relating to a sale or product sold within Australia. So if it's considered an export sale, for example, you provided a service or sold a product to someone overseas who's outside of the GST system, you'd use GST-free income. So they're the two main codes you'll be using. Most of the time it should be GST on income, otherwise GST-free income. And then there's BAS Excluded. An example of when you'd use BAS Excluded for deposits is transfers. So let's say I transferred money from my own account or from a business account into this account and it wasn't a transfer. I would mark that as BAS Excluded, because it's not income, it's just me depositing some funds in there. I'm putting in some added capital, therefore it's BAS excluded as I've already been taxed on that previously. Cool, so that's GST on income, GST-free income, and BAS excluded. Let's look at expenses. So most commonly, people will use GST on expenses. Now, don't abuse this, because typically I see a lot of business owners just putting GST on everything. There are really clear rules about what has GST and what doesn't. First simple rule I'd tell you is, if anyone that doesn't know my business looked at this expense, could it easily be seen as a business expense? So for example, if you're going out to a bar, it's very unlikely that that would be GST claimable, and anyone external to the business would likely think the same way. They'd say, no, that's GST free. There's no GST allowed in that. However, if you've gone out to coffee with a potential client, that's a different situation. If that's required for your business, there may be GST allowable on that. So think of it that way. The other option is look at the invoice. If you think it has GST on it, don't think, prove it. Any item over $82.50, inclusive of GST, the ATO require that you have a tax invoice to prove the GST can be claimed on that expense. So look at the invoice. Does it clearly state GST and how much GST was charged on that purchase? So GST on expenses, to recap, that's any business-related expense within Australia. Typically, you'll have GST on expenses. So what about GST-free? Typical examples of GST-free is, once again, international purchases. So a lot of stock-based businesses will be buying from China and India, Pakistan, the UK. Overseas, they'll be buying items to sell in Australia. Those purchases do not have GST on them because you're being charged by an international company that isn't under our GST legislation. Now, another example of GST-free might be basic foods. If you're in the restaurant industry, most basic foods that you buy will not have GST on them. Bank fees, so your monthly account fees, your interest charges, they're not going to have GST on them. And also, I see a lot in trades and construction contractors. So if the contractor is a smaller operation, they haven't been, maybe they're just working for you and a few other small jobs, it's unlikely that they're GST registered. However, easiest way to check is look them up on the ABN Lookup website. Does it show that they're registered for GST on their ABN that they've provided? If not, you cannot claim GST on that invoice from the contractor. It's GST free. One thing to note here, a lot of people confuse merchant fees and bank fees. So if you've got a FBOS terminal or you're being charged merchant fees by the bank, they are GST claimable. However, your typical account fees and interest charges, overdraft fees, things like that, they are GST free. Cool. Lastly, let's look at BAS excluded. If you've got a withdrawal that is BAS excluded, this would only be used for things outside of GST once again. So paying wages, moving money out of the business into your own account, like a director's loan, that would be BAS excluded. So you've got to think of anything outside of the GST system. So typically it would only be transfers to an external party that isn't a purchase or a sale. So payroll or internal transfers between entities or to the business owner. Cool. So there you have it. They are the GST codes explained. If you have any more questions, feel free to post them below in the comments. If you got something out of this video, please give it a like and subscribe.